When Hollywood recreates World War II, it often reshapes history into a simple story of inevitable American dominance, a narrative where U.S. power appears everywhere, from the opening scenes to the final victory. But this cinematic shortcut quietly erases one of the most critical and dangerous moments the modern world has ever faced. Because in 1940 there was a window of time when the United States was not fighting, when American pilots were not filling the skies of Europe, when no U.S. armies were preparing to liberate the continent, and yet the entire future of Europe, and possibly the world, depended on the outcome of a single struggle, and that struggle was the Battle of Britain, a battle Hollywood often folds into the broader Allied victory but which in reality was fought under conditions so desperate that defeat would have meant the end of any realistic hope of stopping Nazi Germany. Because by the summer of 1940 Europe had collapsed at a speed that shocked even seasoned military observers. Poland had been crushed, Scandinavia occupied, the Netherlands and Belgium overrun, and France, a nation many believed could never fall, defeated in just 6 weeks, leaving Britain isolated, its army forced to evacuate from Dunkirk without heavy weapons, its coastline exposed, its cities within easy reach of enemy bombers, and its people fully aware that if Germany succeeded in crossing the English Channel, resistance would be brief and brutal, while across the Atlantic the United States remained officially neutral, tied down by isolationist politics and public reluctance to enter another European war, meaning Britain could expect words of support and limited supplies, but not soldiers, squadrons, or fleets, and Adolf Hitler believed this moment marked the end of British resistance, convinced that once France was gone Britain would either negotiate peace or collapse under sustained pressure. So he turned to the most feared instrument of German power at that time, the Luftwaffe, ordering it to annihilate Britain's air defenses, destroy the Royal Air Force, and force the nation into submission, clearing the way for a cross-channel invasion plan known as Operation Sea Lion. And from July 1940 onward the skies above southern England became a continuous battlefield, as German bombers crossed the channel in vast formations, escorted by fighters, targeting radar stations, airfields, ports, factories, and infrastructure, confident that numerical superiority and recent victories guaranteed success, while Britain responded with everything it had, relying almost entirely on the Royal Air Force, a force that was smaller, overstretched, and under relentless pressure, yet supported by a revolutionary air defense system that combined early warning radar, ground observers, centralized command, and rapid fighter deployment, allowing Britain to fight smarter rather than harder, conserving limited resources and forcing the Luftwaffe into a battle of attrition it had not planned for. And inside the cockpits of Spitfires and Hurricanes were pilots who were not movie heroes but exhausted young men, some barely out of training, flying multiple sorties a day, watching friends disappear in flames, landing damaged aircraft only to refuel, rearm, and take off again, fully aware that if they failed there would be no second line of defense, no Allied army waiting behind them, no American air power arriving to save the day. And while films often show the battle as a series of dramatic dogfights, the real struggle was far broader and more complex, fought by ground crews repairing aircraft through the night under bombing raids, by radar operators staring at glowing screens in darkened rooms tracking incoming formations, by commanders making impossible decisions about which airfields to defend and which to abandon, and by civilians who endured constant bombing as German strategy shifted from military targets to population centers in an attempt to break morale. Launching what became known as the Blitz, a campaign intended to terrorize Britain into surrender. Yet instead of collapsing, British society adapted. People slept in underground stations, factories relocated and continued producing, ports kept functioning, and morale hardened rather than shattered, while the RAF continued to fight, absorbing losses but replacing aircraft and pilots just fast enough to stay in the air, slowly wearing down the Luftwaffe, whose losses of experienced crews proved increasingly difficult to replace, especially as Germany underestimated Britain's industrial capacity and overestimated the psychological impact of bombing. And at the political heart of this resistance stood Winston Churchill, whose leadership and speeches framed the battle as something far larger than military survival, presenting it as a moral stand against tyranny, making it clear to both the British people and the wider world that surrender was not an option, even if defeat seemed logical. And as weeks of combat turned into months, a critical truth emerged. Despite relentless attacks, the RAF had not been destroyed. Radar stations still functioned, fighter squadrons were still operational, and Germany had failed to gain control of the skies, a failure with enormous strategic consequences, because without air superiority any attempt to invade Britain would have been catastrophic, forcing Hitler to postpone Operation Sea Lion indefinitely, marking the first major strategic defeat suffered by Nazi Germany in World War II, a defeat achieved without American troops, without American squadrons, without the overwhelming industrial power the United States would later unleash, achieved instead by a nation standing alone at the edge of collapse. And this victory reshaped the entire course of the war, because it ensured Britain remained in the fight, providing a base for resistance movements, intelligence operations, and eventually the staging ground for the liberation of Western Europe, meaning that when America finally entered the war after Pearl Harbor, it did not face a continent completely dominated by Nazi Germany, but a surviving ally that had already proven the enemy could be stopped. Yet popular culture often compresses this history, blending later American victories backward into earlier battles, creating the illusion that Allied success was inevitable from the start, when in reality it depended on narrow margins, exhausted pilots, repaired runways, functioning radar, and a refusal to surrender at the darkest moment. And this is why the Battle of Britain matters so deeply, because it was not simply an air campaign, it was a test of endurance, organization, leadership, and national will, fought at a time when defeat would have changed the world forever. And this is why it remains the battle Hollywood often gives to America, but history, evidence, and sacrifice clearly give to Britain. A victory written not in cinematic triumph but in contrails across contested skies, in cities that refused to kneel, and in the courage of those who flew knowing that the fate of freedom rested entirely on their wings.